The Curses and the Covenants, A History Weaver Mystery, Book 2, by Connie Worden, read by the author. Chapter 38. March 10th, 1899. With all the extra time on my hands, one would think I would have plenty of time to write in my diary. And there is plenty of time. There is a shortage of news to write, however. The inspiration and wonder with which I recorded my insights into the curses of Genesis 3 seems to have entirely vanished. Instead, ennui rules the day. I try to read, or sew, or play an instrument, or do anything I should, and I cast aside the book, or sewing, or instrument in a minute or two. I wish I could find that same fascination I felt once for reading the Bible and Papa's books that I did in my convalescence from my illness. I can remember how absorbing it was at that time to think so deeply and so long on a single subject. But perhaps I was not so restless then when I had the time in my hands and no strength to do anything else. Now I feel quite well and strong and wish to be active instead of idle. If I could rein in my wild thoughts to some course of study, as I did then, how much better off I would be. But I seem simply unable to concentrate. And now I find myself without anything else to write in the diary. Bah, I am in a bad way, but will sign off before I'm drawn into any more foolish complaining. Sarah, hey, I need to talk to you. What's up? What's with all the urgency? Why are you calling at this time in the morning? Sarah's voice on the other end was hoarse with sleep, and she yawned unashamedly at me. It is urgent. I don't want to talk about it over the phone. I don't want to talk at Ma's house, and I don't want to talk at your parents' house. We could meet at the Beast, but it's too cold. It would take too long to fire up the furnace and warm the place up. Can you meet me at the school? At the school? On a Saturday? Yes, on a Saturday. I have a key and the codes, and no one will disturb us, so it's the best place, really. Oh, well then, if it's all that important, did you learn something about Julia? Or Danny? Or all the rest of it? I think so. Okay, I'll come. Sarah sounded wide awake in an instant. I was waiting for her in the counselor's office when she arrived just a few minutes behind me. I didn't give Sarah a chance to ask any questions. I'd decided to grab the bull very firmly by the horns, and at once. Sarah, Julia was Danny's child, wasn't she? Danny and Judith. Sarah didn't answer. She seemed to be weighing her options. I took her silence for admission. And you knew about it. How did you find out? I asked her. She finally spoke then. Can you keep a secret, Ange? Danny told me Judith was pregnant. She moved to Cherryton and had the baby in our grade 12 year. Danny did a very stupid thing. He went to Cherryton and kidnapped the baby. What? Why? How? I didn't know which question to pick. Judith had told him she was giving the baby up for adoption. Danny didn't want her to. They'd been fighting a lot about it. He was desperate for them to keep the baby and raise her themselves. Judith didn't tell him, but she wasn't sure about the adoption either. So she didn't give the baby up in the hospital. She was debating keeping the baby and raising her herself. So she'd gone home to her parents' place. Danny still thought she'd decided for sure to give up the baby. So he went around to their place and broke in her window and took her out of her crib. You have to remember, he was not in his right mind. He was usually almost always high in those days. He got a hotel room in Cherryton and spent the night there with Julia, except she wasn't Julia then. And he had a bad time of it with the baby. He'd bought formula and a bottle and diapers, but he didn't know the first thing about looking after babies. He and I never had any secrets from each other. He knew I wouldn't turn him in. So he called me, frantic for advice. Of course, I told him he had to give the baby back to Judith. The baby cried all night, and after the drugs wore off, he realized how much serious trouble he'd be in. So in the morning, he took her back to Judith to find out if she'd called the police on him. She told him she had called the police and they'd be looking for him. In reality, she hadn't. She didn't even know Julia was gone till that morning, but she knew it must have been Danny that took the baby. She convinced her parents to hold off calling the police right away. because she was sure Danny wouldn't hurt the baby, and she didn't want to get him in trouble. But Danny didn't know that. He thought he was going to prison for sure. Is that why he killed himself? She turned away, her face melting into the deformity of uncontrollable crying. Yes, I think so, she said finally when she'd regained the use of her voice. So Judith did end up giving up the baby? Well, after Danny disappeared, she realized she wasn't in a position to raise the baby herself. Not that Danny would have been any help, he was too unstable. But not hearing anything from him, I guess maybe all the stress at once made her realize the best thing for the baby would be to give her up for adoption. Judith and I only talked about the situation one time, and it wasn't a pleasant conversation. She called me a few days after Danny's disappearance to find out if I'd seen him. She still cared about him, she told me. I knew he was already dead, but I didn't tell her. I told her I didn't know where he was. That's when she told me what had happened on her end. I wasn't very fair to her. I was in so much pain after Danny's death that I wanted to lash out and hurt her. It wasn't her fault, but I blamed her. How did you figure out Julia was Danny and Judith's child, though? Couldn't you see it? As soon as I was working with her, the resemblance was obvious to me, even her mannerisms. She was so much like Danny. But you couldn't have been sure. I figured it out. Julia told me she was adopted. Her parents never told me that, but I realized Julia must have been telling the truth. She said they never told her she was adopted. She said they were keeping it a secret for some reason. Like you, she figured it out from the genetics when she learned that two blue-eyed parents couldn't have a brown-eyed child. None of that was proof, though, that she was Danny and Judith's child, I mean. Julia was the right age to be their child, and the Fairchilds moved to Beaver Row shortly after Julia's birth, right around the time Judith moved back. Given how much Julia reminded me of Danny, it all seemed to fit. You think the Fairchilds followed Judith to Beaver Row so she could be around Julia? Maybe that was part of the adoption agreement. Must have been a private adoption, seeing the parties know each other. If your guess was correct, I mean. She stopped me with a shake of her head. It's more than a guess, there's also this. Sarah took out her phone and found what she was looking for on it. After Danny died and I had a cell phone, I sent these pictures to myself from off his phone. He must have taken them the night he took Julia to the hotel room. She held the phone out for me to see and flipped through a few of the pictures. It took me a few seconds, but then I saw her point. In the pictures, the baby had a small strawberry birthmark, like an upside-down heart on the corner of her left eye. Oh, I said. I hadn't noticed the birthmark immediately because my attention was captured by something else. The baby was lying in a wooden cradle. In one of the pictures, I could see markings on it like symbols carved into it. I made a mental note to ask Sarah more about the cradle, but I had other questions I wanted answered first. So, you told Julia what you'd guessed. Was that wise? Sarah's eyes narrowed. I didn't tell her. You did, though. That much I know. At least I have some pretty good evidence that you did. She didn't answer, but glared at me in a way I'd never seen her look before. I was caught completely off guard when she suddenly lunged across the desk at me with a scream like a wildcat. Her hands were around my throat before I had time to know what was happening. Sarah, stop it! I choked out. She couldn't possibly mean to strangle me, could she? For being so small, her hands were surprisingly strong, and they seemed to mean business. There was no let-up in the pressure they were applying to my throat. I was beginning to see stars in the darkness that told me she was succeeding in cutting off my oxygen. I tried to grapple her hands away and couldn't. Either she was stronger than I was or more determined. I clawed at her. I twisted violently, trying to shake her off, but she was like a pit bull. Stop it! I tried to scream at her. Only mangled sounds came out. I heard her say, I hate you, Angie. I hate you, over and over. In spite of the madness that was happening, I had time and space enough to wonder why. Why did my cousin, who I'd known all my life, suddenly hate me? Or had she always? Why was she trying to kill me? Who was this stranger kneeling on my desk with her hands around my throat? It happened so fast, and I was so stunned that I couldn't understand what was happening while it was happening. But the next thing in my awareness was Larry's presence in the room. He was prying Sarah's hands away from my neck and holding her wrists in a grip I knew was like steel behind her back. "Angie," he shouted, "call 911. Where was my phone? Had I even brought it? "I can't," I said in a voice that came out rusty and damaged. "Get my phone out of my back pocket," he commanded. What was with Larry becoming my rescuer every time I needed rescuing, I asked myself as I found his phone and only half listened to him walking me through how to get into it. I dialed the emergency number and held the phone up to him so he could do the talking. I wouldn't have made any sense if I'd tried to do the talking. He didn't know what he'd walked into or why it was happening, but he knew enough. He told the operator that he had an assault victim who might need medical attention, and that we needed the police immediately because he was holding the perpetrator till they got there. The police arrived within minutes, lights and sirens going on both cars. Pete and another officer I didn't know personally burst through the door of the school and into the office, guns pulled. I knew it was only Pete's training that kept his jaw from dropping at the sight of me sitting on the desk nursing my sore neck, while Larry, standing behind her, tightly held onto Sarah's wrists. She'd given up the pointless struggle by then. She only stared me down with pure hatred and rage in her eyes. As Larry went to transfer his grip on her to the handcuffs Pete was untangling to plant on her wrists, she saw her chance and shot out her limbs, writhing and striking out with all her might, screaming that wild scream I'd heard from her earlier. It was a terrifying sound like an animal or a possessed being. Even when she was subdued between the three men who had her safely in handcuffs, she kicked and thrashed, flinging her body around like a dying snake. She tried to ram her head into Larry's abdomen. I was horrified to watch her suddenly switch directions and sink her teeth into the flesh of Pete's forearm. His training was no match for Sarah's biting, and he gave out a roar of pain and surprise. "Watch her," he warned his partner. "She's a biter. Let's get her into your car, you take her back to the station to book her, and I'll stay and find out what happened." "What's the charge?" the other cop asked. "Assault, obviously, of a police officer, if nothing else," Pete said grimly, rubbing his arm where a bite mark was coming up. "Now, somebody fill me in. What is going on here?" he said, looking back and forth between Larry and I.